Hello, welcome to our CMI assignment video on Unit 704, Developing Organizational Strategy. This will just be a quick 10-minute video to give you a brief overview of the assignment and some helpful pointers to get you started. This is our tutor, James, who is an expert in this assignment and will be leading you through this 10-minute video.
Thank you, Charlotte. I'm an expert. We'll do our best. Okay, thanks for watching the video, everybody. We're going to just talk you through this in a fairly overview way, so nothing too detailed, just for 10 minutes, with the aim of trying to help you just to get your heads around just some of the approaches you may take towards some of these assessment criteria, some of these questions. And so the unit overall is a little bit like a mountain, so we're going to try and kind of get to base camp first, play around with some of the theories, some of the concepts, some of those tools we can use for strategy. And at the end of the assignment for learning outcome 2, we're going to go ahead and actually apply that to your own context and demonstrate that you understand how to develop strategy in a real life applied situation. So that's the kind of structure of the assignment. The first learning outcome then is to understand how to develop strategy. This is the kind of base camp stuff. And the first question is to critique the factors which drive the development of organizational strategy. What we're looking to do here then is first to identify what some of those factors might be, and the indicative content here on the unit synopsis suggests we break that up into internal and external factors, and it gives you a load of different examples here. For example, cost structures, appetite for innovation. It could be leadership, capability or appetite or style. And then externally, it could be, all the kind of pest factors of political, economic, sociological, technological kind of stuff that might exist around you. So I think the key thing is going to critique the factors, and that might mean that we're going to, once we identify some internal and external factors, you're going to go ahead and just try and figure out to what extent you think those factors may, drive the development of the strategy. You might also consider here potentially maybe in different contexts that different factors might come to the fore, or other factors may be less prevalent. So I don't know, you could think around, if we're in a situation where the external environment is very volatile, might that kind of emphasize our leadership capability and whether that drives? Would you lean into that then, or do we go to emergency reactive mode and not quite sure what to do? So it's just trying to figure out, just to apply some critical thinking around those factors once you've identified them. We don't want to kind of identify as many factors as you can see in the indicative content here. I would suggest you choose maybe a couple of key factors, both internal and external, and then critique them. The key things here is that we're going to perform that critique of the factors. So we're going to do the command verb there and apply that in. Those factors need to really be at the heart of driving the development of the strategy. So they've got to be really impactful, really, what you believe to be maybe the big levers around development strategy. And the other thing that I think might be useful here is to think about, well, this is, opening of the assignment, and we've got that phrase, organizational strategy, in our first question. So you may benefit from putting a really nice definition of what you think organizational strategy means here, so that it gives you a nice foundation for the rest of your work, the rest of the assignment. So that's kind of the first one. So we're going to set the parameters there. We're going to put the definition in. We're going to start to identify and then critique the factors which you think drive that development. In what ways do they? How might they not? What different situations might lean into certain ways and others? Yeah, and just make sure that we're going to apply some good critical thinking here. Charlotte, do we get many? I don't know if I got the statistics here, but do we get many referrals on this now? Do we tend to find that?
1.1, no. So the next assessment criteria, 1.2, is quite a common one for referrals.
Oh, okay, right. So 1.2 then is to critically appraise now approaches for the development strategy. So again, if we look at the indicative content for a second, we mentioned here deliberate, emergent, incremental. So these could be to do with Henry Mintzberg's approach to strategy as a more agile, nudgy, stepped approach rather than big, project-based approach to strategy, and being a little bit more conscious that the environment is going to change until and extent as you go along. How do we deal with that change? So here, I think there's an opportunity to talk around overall approaches to how we do it. Without getting too much in the nuts and bolts of different models necessarily here, you could certainly use a few to illustrate your answer, but generally, how can organization approach the development strategy in the first place? Are they more focused on their internal environment out? Are they more focused on their external environment in? Maybe different types of organization might have different approaches to strategy. So it could be that a public sector, third sector, private sector organization may treat this development differently. They probably do. Who funds it? What impact does the political or funding environment have for the organization, and how that might influence how different approaches might then show up in strategy? Do we try and plan for 5 years ahead? That word plan, which is probably a bad one in strategy, but do we do that, or do we have a nice flexible agile approach to trying to figure out that more emergent approach? So this is the more, I think, structural, almost philosophical approaches to strategy. You can use different authors on this. There are plenty. You've got Michael Porter potentially for competitive strategy. You've got Ansoff for growth strategy. You've got Mintzberg for the learning organization. These are different kind of philosophies of organizational approach that then leads to how we develop the strategy. There's some differences in there we can talk about here. So hopefully that helps a little bit, just to give an overview of approaches to 1.2, but it's really important that we're going to perform that critical appraisal on several approaches to how we might develop strategy differently. So as long as we hit those metrics, I think that's probably where we need to be for this question.
I think it's also quite important to mention the CMI command verb document you've got. So this will really help you with this assessment criteria as well, with critically appraised. So there is a document attached to your starter email that describes the CMI requirements for each of these verbs.
Yeah, thank you. And if you get any further questions from that in terms of when you start to write, not too sure, please come into our technical tutorials that we offer for free of charge for the first year after your course is finished. We're here to help you. If you want to write the assignments, we're here to help you. So please do use the resources you make available. 1.3, discuss the challenges then of developing and leading organizational strategy. So here, this discusses the command verb. So you could potentially, if you haven't already, bring a bit of lived experience into this just to enrich and illustrate your answer a little bit. But we're going to focus on what gets in the way now of developing a leading organizational strategy as you've defined strategy, and bearing in mind maybe some of the approaches you've already critically appraised. Here then we might talk about culture of resistance to the strategy. We might talk around the pace or type of change in the organization, our change readiness, our trust with leadership. There's plenty of different things in here, I think. So the big win here, I think, or the focus would be, it's asking you to discuss the challenges of both developing organizational strategy and leading it too. So for me, I would take those two things as perhaps, interrelated but separate components too. So you want to have a little bit of discussion around the developing challenges, and also some narrative that talks about the challenges of leading the organizational strategy too, which might imply behavioral role modeling. It might apply to your executive focus on the strategy over time, strategic drift, assumptions and strategies that actually don't work out. What do we do with that then as a leadership team? Are we willing to accept the strategy is not working? What do we do about that if that's the case? There's all sorts of stuff we can talk around the leadership of strategy as well as how we develop it too. Okay, time, again, urgency. And one of the big wins often for most people here is going to be, if we're too reactive, we're too stressed out, we're burned out, or we're bored out, those conditions in the organization you might discuss could then result in challenges to doing anything strategic, because we end up being knocked into a reactive tactical posture instead. Okay, so there's hopefully plenty to talk about. This is all base camp stuff. There's plenty of themes and lots of quite interesting stuff to talk about there. So I'm biased, but there's plenty of interesting things to talk about strategy around here. Do you do strategy as a once a year thing where we all sit down and we have to go through a strategic planning process and we do it again in 12 months? How does that square with an ever-changing environment where your assumptions, your data, your biases may be exposed after 3 months into your planning cycle, but you're going to wait another 9 months before you do your planning cycle again, right? So there's some interesting questions there around how we just approach strategy. There is a school of thought, for example, that might treat strategy as an everyday activity rather than a once a year thing. So there's some useful things to talk about, I reckon. Okay, learning outcome 2 then. Here's how we're going to apply this, and you're going to produce a strategy. Now, again, the first thing here, this is broken into 2 component steps. The first is developing a strategy to achieve a business objective. The second one is to recommend an approach to implement and monitor that strategy to ensure a success. Okay, so kind of the same thing, but broken into 2 questions here, I guess. And the main thing that I think some people don't get quite right on this one, if they do get referred, would be we don't go upstream and downstream enough of the plan bit. The strategy isn't just a plan, we would say. The plan is a component part of it, but the strategy is broader than that. So we might be asking questions here, for example, around what our vision, values, our objective is. Is it valid? What data do we have to support that before we get into effectively executing a strategy around it? You know, so there's no point in executing a strategy really well if the strategy is based on house of cards to begin with. We need both. We need a good ideation, a good formulation that aligns, as well as a good execution too. So that's the kind of upstream bit. The downstream bit is more kind of 2.2, which is what measures do you have? What review process do you have in place? What mechanisms do you have to embed the thing culturally, behaviorally, leadership-wise? There's all sorts of things, again, there to consider, I believe. So it's really that upstream, downstream, the whole holistic approach to strategy we're looking for, rather than here's a plan, here's why it's great. The assessors are looking for a little bit more depth at level 7 than that. Okay, I don't know, Charlotte, again, if we see a few referrals on these, not too many, but I think it's often that failure to kind of look at the whole holistic environment around the plan. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so I think we get a couple of referrals on 2.1 especially. So it's important just to kind of really consider what you're putting in that one.
Yeah. So, and again, this isn't complicated stuff. Your objective could be growth. It could be to improve your recruitment retention process. It could be how you're going to collaborate better. It could be new products and service development. But whatever it is, it's making sure that you can develop a strategy around that objective effectively, make sure the whole thing aligns, make sure that you've ideally what we do is we kind of perform some good analysis, interrogate the quality of the data you have upon which you're making the decision to do the strategy you're going to do. Then we have a good gateway of decision making around that. So we're clear that, given our resources, our positioning, our posture, our appetite, all that kind of stuff, is this the most appropriate way to focus our attention? Or could there be something better? And finally, then, if we've made a decision and we can show our workings out, it's all nice and robust, how do we make sure it's effective in that change angle of the cycle? And again, for me, this is where we could introduce change theory, whether it's Kubler-Ross change curve, whether it's Lewin force field analyses and 3-step changes, or whether it's Kotter's 8 steps, which is, if it's a fairly sophisticated one, which is a pretty robust model, I think, for most. But it's using some kind of tools and modeling here. And typically, you'd want to bring at least one accepted model or theory to most of the different assessment criteria throughout this particular assignment. But again, people, where I see maybe people going a bit wrong is that lack of alignment to something else. It's just, this is the plan. We're in a tactical mindset, I have to say. What does it refer to? How is this solving our problem? Do we know what problem this strategy is designed to solve? And then downstream of that, again, it's that, how would we know if it's right? Critically, how do we know if this is wrong? What measures would we see? What indicators would we see after 2 weeks, 2 months, 6 months that we're off track? Because the professional strategist wants to know that you can change, adapt, challenge assumptions, get better data, reposition, whatever it is, to make sure that we're ultimately effective. Because we know, unfortunately, the statistics suggest that most strategies fail, 50 to 70%, we think. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff and important stuff to talk about here if we're going to be effective in organizations designing and creating their future with intention, which is one of the kind of principles behind strategy for me. So I hope that kind of helps as a quick overview of I don't know if that's 10 minutes or so. Probably I've talked more than that, Charlotte, but I hope that gives a kind of good overall, top line level approach to some of these things. Is there anything else you think, Charlotte, we could
I
cover?
just remember everyone needs to have access to the CMI resources. It's called Management Direct, and they'll be sending you your login details to this. And this has got lots of articles, videos, help to write the assignment as well. Lots on the theories and the models. So please use that as much as you can. We're here to help if you have any questions, and you can contact us anytime at cmi@mpd.co.uk. Yeah, but I think hopefully that's everything, and hopefully we've given you a good base to get started.
Hope that's helped everybody. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.